Morning, students. I thought I would like to do one last YouTube video with you for several reasons. I'm going to explain the nature of our last written assignment, which is actually going to be the final exam in terms of the course, and then to talk to you a little bit about some concerns and some things that I feel better to tell you in person rather than just to write some kind of impersonal email. In fact, I think I can articulate this better. So I'm going to make some announcements and pronouncements as well. First of all, in terms of the Odyssey exam, I'm reading these now, and I will say to you that for the most part, you cooperated very well. You turned in the exam, some of you, the 11th hour, but that was fine. You respected very well my deadline. And on my roster, there are 24 of you. There are 24 names are listed. I received 21 exams. I think that's pretty good. Some of my colleagues have told me that they're not getting papers in a ready fashion to this extent, meaning this number. So that's good. Now, those of you, those few who did not do the Odyssey exam, you're going to have difficulty making a grade in this course because I told you that that was an important major grade. You remember I told you I was giving you a little bit more consideration over the Odyssey exam than the Iliad, though a number of you did very well on the Iliad exam. Here you were not confined at all by time. I gave you plenty of time to do this exam. So I will remind you, as a kind of courtesy, that if you have decided that you're not finishing the course, or if I've talked to you in a personal way by email, be very, very sure now that you drop. I'm not dropping you. You drop the course by this Friday, May the 1st. Now, if you don't do it and you get an F in the course, that's your problem. I'm not going to be patient and deal with you. I'm warning you ahead of time that you drop by Friday. That's the universe. They've extended, the registrar's office has extended this deadline to Friday, May the 1st. So you need to make that decision there. Another thing I want to say to you that obviously this has not been the way that I would have ordinarily chosen to teach the course. But circumstances, you remember when we looked in the Iliad and we looked at that moment where the gods decided they were going to flood the city of Troy, and we talked about the idea that man's expectations are not always realized, that we have to contend with these natural occurrences. Well, probably all of us, we're all facing one of the most horrific occurrences, I suppose, certainly in my lifetime, maybe in your lifetime as well. This was all beyond our control, but what we're trying to do is make the best of a situation. And I think for the most part, we have done so as best we can. Probably in terms of the university community, you have been sympathized with. They have said that compassion and understanding must be shown to you. I think for all purposes I have, but there's a limit too. You know, you've got to be willing to put forth a kind of effort yourself. And part of what sometimes may go unnoticed, I sit here and talk to you. You know, all consideration just can't be afforded you. I'm part of this too. In other words, I'm feeling the brunt of what has befallen you. I have to be extremely careful and not take chances in terms of what's going on out there. That outside force bothers me as much as it may bother some of you and your families too. So, that needs to be taken into account. And I think for the most part, most of you have been cooperative. A few of you have chosen to sort of want to manipulate the system a little bit. Don't, because the times are what they are. Now, what I'm doing today is to let you know that your final exam, which is outlined in the academic calendar for the spring semester, it tells, if you look at the times listed for the final exam, ours is scheduled for Wednesday, May the 6th. Now, we're not going to worry about any time that's given there. What I'm going to do by the time I finish this lecture or my commentary this morning, you're going to have the benefit of 1 week to get in this last written assignment. Now, I want you to put forth a great deal of effort in this because it's going to become really a very important part of your grade. So it must be turned in to me by Wednesday, May 6th. I will give you until midnight, as I did with the Odyssey exam. And once again, I want you to write or to type it in the Word document, use that formatting. And most of you did a very, very good job for your Odyssey exam. So simply follow that same procedure, if you will. But now I'm under a little bit of pressure this time because the registrar's office says that we must get in grades. We must submit the final grade by a particular deadline. So they're imposing a kind of timetable on us to get the grades in. So that's why I'm being a bit deliberate with you. I'm telling you that you have an obligation to me, but also to yourselves to get this in on time. And I'm giving you plenty of time. You have the benefit of 1 full week. And what I would encourage some of you, once I explain to you the nature of this assignment, you don't have to wait until the last minute. And I know there are other exams that you will be taking, I suppose, but go ahead, if you have time now, begin the exam, turn it in as soon as you can. You don't have to wait until the last minute. So, for example, today's Wednesday. If you have some time tomorrow, Friday, over the weekend, go ahead and finish it, get it out of the way, and then you will have completed the course. So for the third or fourth time, I remind you, the exam must be turned in by Wednesday, May the 6th, midnight. Now, let me explain the nature of the exam and what you're going to do. It bothers me a bit that I did not have enough time to go in and teach Hamlet in any kind of depth. What I'm going to do this morning is call your attention to some ideas that you might have seen in Hamlet. I'm going to give you, and understand this is not a requirement, I'm going to give you a kind of bonus question on Hamlet. If you want to do it in order to add an additional record to your grade, an additional entry, you may do so. I think I explained to you that if you were inclined, you can go on the internet, you can go to YouTube and type in Hamlet, and actually you can see a production, or I don't even care that you watch the entire production, maybe just a portion of, and the genre. We're no longer reading an epic poem. Our new genre is a play. We're reading a play. And I would like for you to, the intent of the play is to be seen. So if you would like to, watch a production of Hamlet, and then write me just about a one page, and you can attach it to your final. Write me a one-page reaction summary to your having seen this play. So, as I said, this is entirely up to you. If you want to do this, you may do so. Attach it to it does not have to be a separate Word document. Just attach it to it can come after, it can be the last entry in your Word document for your final. So I hope my comments are clear here. I repeat for emphasis, you do not have to do this summary of Hamlet, only if you want to. If you do so, it would obviously enhance your grade. For example, some of you may have not turned in one of the reading assignments, or even before the semester, maybe you made a bad grade. So I'm giving you every opportunity to realize a good grade in the course. So this is a little plum that I give to you if you're interested. But if you feel that you've done and can do well on the final without this paper, that's perfectly fine. Remember, part of what you've learned in the course, I hope, this semester is this idea of choice. Remember, we had to get that across in terms of the Odyssey. Now, let me explain to you the nature of your final paper for me in terms of the course. This will be the last entry. We're not going to worry about any more reading assignments, that sort of thing, because if I were teaching Hamlet, it would take me several periods. In other words, I would have to spend as much time or more on teaching Hamlet than I would have in teaching the Iliad and the Odyssey. Here's the nature of your final, so listen very carefully. And you may have to go back and listen to me once or twice again. All right, what you're going to write for me is about 2.5 to 3 pages doing a comparison contrast between Achilles and Odysseus as heroes. Now, you might use quotes from the text. You might include events. You might include examples and situations from the two poems that reinforce your stance. So clearly, about 2.5, a 3-page comparison contrast between Achilles and Odysseus. Now, I'll offer you these guidelines. For example, you might compare and contrast their moral, ethical values. One thing I would probably do if I were writing the paper, I would want to compare and contrast their relationship with people. Another thing I would call your attention to, what do people say about them? You remember how I called your attention to the importance of dialogue in terms of the two poems. And then, what about their goals? What about their aspirations? And then I would take into account, for example, their experiences. So I'm not saying that you have to take these 5, shall I say, statements that I've just made. These are some suggestions. You have every license to use at your disposal what you would consider to be the basis of a good comparison, contrast between Achilles and Odysseus. Now you sit back and you think about this. I think that this is a very, very reasonable assignment for you to work. And I would think, my gosh, in 1 week's time, you can start it, stop it, come back, add to it. And if you surely can get this to me by midnight, Wednesday, May 6th. So sometimes you have this tendency to wait until the last minute. Don't procrastinate. Now, I'm telling you much in advance, so this is it. I don't know how much more of a clarification I can offer you. Now, I don't want to confuse you. If some of you have looked at Hamlet and you're already, say, familiar with Hamlet, you feel comfortable, I don't care if you mention Hamlet in this paper, but you do not have to. My concern in the paper is you're doing this comparison between Achilles and Odysseus. So I hope that I have articulated clearly the nature of this assignment. I think my explanations should help you much better than if I were just to type this out and send it to you through email, though I'll probably reinforce that a little bit too. So with that in mind, that is going to be the nature of your last paper, which will meet the requirements for the final exam. Now, I will say a little bit about Hamlet for those of you who are interested. And this might help some of you. Once again, you decide what's going to be best for you. So what I would call your attention to, just very briefly, understand that this is not even a good Cliff Notes version. I'm just suggesting some things. Maybe at a given time on your own, you would like to read Hamlet. And maybe some of you have already read Hamlet in another course. So you let it be comfortable with you. Do with it what you want. Now, clearly, I just told you a moment ago that we're looking at a new literary genre. We're no longer concerned with the epic poem. We're looking at a play. And all of you certainly understand that the intent of a drama is that it's to be performed. That's one of the reasons why I'm asking you to go and watch, if you will, a production of Hamlet. See a performance of it. You're going to pay attention then as you watch the play. Very similar, some of you go and see a movie. You're going to sit there and you're going to watch and see what happens. As you're watching the performance, you're going to pay attention to how important dialogue is between and among characters. And then part of it, just as you're watching a movie, you're going to pay some attention to visual effects. So that I call your attention to. Now, all of you have heard of Shakespeare. He probably was one of the greatest, I'm biased, writers of our time. Maybe modern critics today would disagree, but doesn't bother me at all. I still think so. Now, he was an English playwright. I don't want you to come up, one of you, and tell me that he lived at the time of Homer. One of my students did that. He lived in what we would call the 16th century. He lived in the period known as the English Renaissance. And he wrote a number of plays. Depending on what new plays may have been added to his canon, which means the listing of the works attributed to Shakespeare, some would say anywhere between 38, 39 plays. And they fall into probably 4 distinct classifications. He wrote comedies. He wrote romances. He wrote histories about the kings of England. And then probably his fame would have rested on these 3 classifications, but he was very, very skilled in writing his tragedies. Now, when I teach Shakespeare, I always like to say that he wrote 4 pure tragedies. And the 4 are Hamlet, which you're looking at if you're interested, Macbeth, Othello, and King Lear. We leave out maybe one of your favorite, Romeo and Juliet. It's not a pure play. And the reason a pure tragedy. Pure tragedy. And the reason it's not, these four plays, I can give you at least two reasons why I would call these pure tragedies. One reason, you're concerned entirely with character delineation. You have what is called the emergence of what constitutes the tragic character, the tragic protagonist. We can even use the word the tragic hero. All right, notice I've just told you the titles. We're not concerned in these four plays with any kind of an event. For example, in one of his comedies, you might have been familiar with A Midsummer Night's Dream. See, these four plays emphasize the importance of character development. And then if you look, and in terms of the four plays, all of them deal with what's called a kind of progressive study of evil. If you're reading Hamlet, note that in this play, you have a distinct villain in the person of Claudius, the king. And look what Claudius had done. Now, as I continue, I'd like to make mention of some, if I were teaching Hamlet in depth, I would offer you the same insight in the plot formation as I did with the Iliad and the Odyssey. There is, too, a violation of order, and what we have to do in terms of the play is to restore that order that's been violated. All right? Once again, our three levels. Religious order is violated. Political order is violated. Domestic social order violated. Now, by the end of the play, as I pointed out in terms of the Iliad, as I pointed out in terms of the Odyssey, that order must be restored, and we must have resolution. I told you in the last two works that there is a resolution. If you look at the last lines of Hamlet, you will find that there's a resolution to Hamlet as well. Now, a difference in say, my having wanted to teach Hamlet in detail, the drama itself, the tragedy, it makes use of what's called the 5-act structure, meaning that Shakespeare's plays are written in 5 acts with a number of scenes. I can't tell you the exact number of scenes in each act because that varies. But you begin with Act 1, which is called the Exposition. It's going to give you all of the background information that you need to know. You go to Act 2, you have what is called the rising action. And in terms of the rising action, you're going to be introduced to a problem. After all, if there's not a problem that we have to address, then there will be no real basis. So the problem then will give way in time to the conflict. I mean, there's conflict in this play. And then you get to the third act. The third act in one of these tragedies that I just mentioned always occurs in the third act. This play is so significant, so important, that there are 3 events in the third act that might constitute the climax. Then you go in the fourth act to what's called the falling action. They're going to pick up all of the pieces, put them together, so that by the time you get to the fifth act, you're ready for the resolution. You're ready, as I pointed out in terms of the Iliad and the Odyssey, you're ready for, when I say resolution always enacts change. Now, the most important thing that I can tell you in terms of Hamlet right now in the way of background is anytime you read one of these 4 tragedies, some get confused and say, well, what is meant by the stem of the play? What is meant by the impact of the play? From where does it come? The answer is very simple. The impact of tragedy always stems from the family unit. And if you're reading Hamlet, look very carefully in Hamlet. In Hamlet, the impact comes from the family. We see a disruption in the family order. In fact, there's the main plot, which is Hamlet and his family, and you have a secondary plot, which is Polonius and his family. All right, the impact comes from the family unit because both family units are dysfunctional. See? So we have to address that in the course of the play. Now, what you have to remember in terms of Hamlet, once these events occur in Denmark, meaning the murder of Hamlet's father and the ascension of his brother to the throne and the marriage of his brother to his wife. See all of that? All right. Hamlet's been away from it. He's been a student away. And when I say I pause a moment, in terms of a student, he's been at the University of Wittenberg, which was a center of learning. And just as some of you, I mean, look, when we were together in the face-to-face situation, you were living here, and most of you or many of you, and then your family unit remained back home. And things may have been going on there that you did not particularly know about. And I've had this happen many times with students. Sometimes they get a call and there's a disruption in terms of the family order. Very true here. Now, Hamlet is called back home, and there would have been a kind of lapse of time. He's got to get back home from the university, back from Germany, back to Denmark. And what's going to happen, he comes back home, and he's got to deal with this problem, or I will say problems. So one of in order to get the handle of Hamlet, I think, the central problem to me in Hamlet is to explain initially his reluctance in taking any kind of action. And one aspect of the action that he's got to he's got to handle, he's got to deal with, is he's called upon to take revenge against what has occurred in the play. In other words, he's got to avenge the death of his father. Now, what I'd like to offer you is I think is really a kind of good insight here. There's some positions concerning this reluctance. Some will even use the word like procrastination. One position is, and you may see that if you watch this video, you may see how this is presented. Some say, look, there really is no delay. Hamlet needed time to find out the true circumstances of what occurred. You remember the answer is going to be given to him from his having seen the ghost of his father. Remember, his father orders him, and his father says, "Revenge my most unnatural murder." Can you imagine the shock? All right. Now, some will say that Hamlet, by his nature, was not fitted for this task. It was too difficult for him. Someone else might have been able to do it a little bit differently. And a kind of, I think, weak position is this. The task was too difficult for anyone. Hamlet probably did the best that he could. Now, I want you to recognize, so you can identify a little bit, if you're interested, there are very distinct, specific problems confronting Hamlet. This might put the play on a more believable level for you to understand. Because, look, one problem, one contention for Hamlet is he's got to deal, it's going to happen to, at one time or another, probably to all of us. He's got to deal with the death of a parent. He's got to deal with the death specifically of his father. Note, that is about as highly personal as you can get. Remember, in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes to Hades, he's got to see in Hades the soul of his departed mother. All right? Now, Achilles has got to deal with the death of Patroclus, remember. Priam has got to deal with the death of Hector. See the similarities? Now, let's compound this. It's enough that Hamlet's got to deal with the death of his father, but, my gosh, he's told that his father was murdered. That's enough. But go so far as this. He was murdered by his uncle. See? Now, another specific problem is Hamlet has got to deal with the marriage of his mother. All right. At this time, this act would have been considered a moment of incest. It would have been incestuous. So the idea is she marries his father's brother. This is wrong at this time. And also what bothers Hamlet. Can you imagine what the weight that's put upon this man? I think that in a kind of personal way, there could be some moments on your part of self-identification. Hamlet, say, becomes very angry at his mother. And another thing is his mother did not wait for a respectable time to mourn. You all understand that this took place in just a short period of time. Remember, if you watch the production, in some productions, you're going to see Hamlet appear on stage wearing what's called sullen black. He's wearing his mourning clothes. All right? He's mourning the death of his father. And he thinks that his mother, a respectable period of time, would have been to wait at least a year. She didn't do that. All right? So all you have to do, if you're looking at the play, go into the second scene, and by the time Hamlet gets back to Denmark, she's already married. And then we forget this initially in the play, the whole business of what's going to happen to the throne. Claudius is king. Some will say, well, why wouldn't Hamlet have become king because he's the eldest son? He doesn't become king because in Denmark, at this time, the king was elected. See, what Claudius does is to get himself in position as king so he won't have to contend with Hamlet. It's all done by the time Hamlet gets home. And then last, I would call your attention here. Excuse me. Hamlet is governed by a strict, maybe this is part of his university education, a strict code of behavior. He's torn between a moral code and an honor code. And these two are in conflict. So Hamlet, gosh, so much is thrust upon him. Now, pardon my clocks are going off. I hope this won't disturb you. I'd like to make about 2 or 3 more general comments. And then this will give you a little bit of an insight as you may want to go into Hamlet. Hamlet is by far Shakespeare's brightest, wittiest, and most attractive of his heroes. But at the same time, he probably is the hardest to understand. Truly, he is Shakespeare's intellectual hero. Now, Hamlet feels, for all purposes, that this world has betrayed him. Hamlet has very, very high expectations. Some would even say that this might be a kind of flaw in his character. Remember, we looked at the flaws in Achilles, we looked at flaws in terms of Odysseus. Some will say, and I always like to maybe teach it from this perspective, that Hamlet is acutely idealistic. He has these high expectations, but sometimes these expectations aren't realistic. See, what's got to happen to Hamlet by the end of the play, he's got to become very much more realistic. In other words, initially Hamlet can't sort out all of these imperfections in life. Now, probably an important concern is this. If you look at the tragedies themselves, one aspect of the tragedies is this. If you look at the other three plays, the tragic hero is in some way responsible, good or bad, for the course of action. In our play, Hamlet is not complicit. He had nothing to do with what has happened. If you read Macbeth, note what Macbeth did. If you remember reading Othello, if you even read King Lear. So these are some insights that I wanted to, in a sense, call your attention to. I just made out a few notes for you to consider. I close my comments this way, and part of the play is very much like I called your attention to in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It very much deals with identification. What's got to happen is that Hamlet's got to, in time, come to know himself. He doesn't right now. See, he will in the course of the play. Note, if you're reading the play, it's going to pose a question. Who's there? The answer will come much later in the play. Hamlet is going to establish, he's got to be, just like characters we looked at in the Iliad and the Odyssey, he's got to undergo a process of initiation. He himself has got to be initiated into life. He's got to act upon experience. Now, what will happen in the course of the play, he will undergo a significant change, but that change will occur once he will be away from Denmark. You remember, as you read the play, you will find out that he will be sent to England, and the change in Hamlet's character will occur while he is making that voyage to England and the occurrences there. And then he will come back, he will make the choice to come back to Denmark and set events right. So probably by the end of the play, in order to satisfy this idea of resolution even a little bit better, what's going to happen is that Hamlet, see, right now, Hamlet has, by his education, an understanding of knowledge. But what he acquires at the end of the play is true wisdom. You know, you have to make a distinction, don't you see, between knowledge and wisdom. And I always like to put it this way. At the end of the play, there is the acquisition of wisdom. And part of that explanation of wisdom is that if you have wisdom, you understand that maybe all knowledge may not be beneficial. See, what Hamlet has got to learn in the course of the play is we have to deal with the imperfections in life. We have to deal with the imperfections in terms of human nature. And don't you see? I think this is very timely in terms of what's happening with us today. So I've talked now for about 40 minutes. and I've given you a very clear explanation of what I want you to do, my expectations of you in terms of finishing the course. So I do ask for your cooperation, and do turn in this last assignment to me for the fourth or fifth time by Wednesday, May 6th, midnight. Do a good job on it. Put some thought into it. The assignment is really not that difficult. I think it's going to be a good summation of what you might have gotten out of the course. Once again, I remind you, if I had it to do all over again, obviously I wouldn't have chosen what we're doing now. In other words, I, as you probably too, would have greatly preferred attending class on a, I would think, usual basis at 11 o'clock. And you would hear me discuss for the 45, 50 minutes. But see, once again, our expectations aren't realized. So I do think that we have tried to make the best of a very difficult situation. And I do offer you my understanding, but in turn, I have to ask you for your cooperation, because it really takes both of us. So I will post this video shortly, and then be sure that you look. I will also send you an email. So once again, just to make sure that all of you understand, I want this 2.5, 3-page comparison contrast paper, Achilles, Odysseus. I outlined some points that you could use. And I said that you may work in Hamlet if you feel comfortable. That would add a little bit. But my main concern is if you use Hamlet, Hamlet will come secondary. I want a thorough discussion on your part between Achilles and Odysseus. You might work in Hamlet as you arrive at a kind of conclusion. That's perfectly fine. And then, as I said, if you want extra credit, if you want a kind of bonus assignment, go ahead and do this review of the play. Just one page, so attach it all together. Wednesday, May 6th. So you have a good day, finish school successfully, and then in closing, if you're making the decision, you be sure and drop the class by May 1st. So once again, the decision is yours. Have a good day and take care of yourselves. Goodbye.